joining. Well, welcome everybody to what I'm told is number 46 in this experimental series that we started a while ago. This is our last one until September. We're taking most of the summer off, so 11th of September we're planning to come back. I should hope that all of you are getting the TSF newsletter, or at least the trad song discussion list, where you'll have details of when we're coming back, but we're aiming for 11th of September. And then don't forget, after that, we've got our Broadside Extra Day in October, 15th of October in Dublin. Also, don't forget, there's the Vaughan Williams Library conference in November, probably a 2-day conference on Vaughan Williams, of course, that's right. So plenty of things to look forward to in the autumn. The Ballad Partners are very soon, they're going to publish another in their series of papers, folk song papers. The volume is called Thirsty Work, because the first chapter in the book is Katie Howson's Thirsty Work presentation that she gave us. And in fact, the whole volume is written versions of presentations given at TSF meetings. We hope that will be out in a few weeks' time, certainly before we meet again in September. So without further ado, this is, as I say, this is our last but not least of our current series. And we have Sam Richards, Bob Askew, and then, because we didn't have a third person, you've got me doing a work in progress thing to finish off the season, as it were. So we're going to go to Sam first of all. Are you ready, Sam? Don't forget to unmute.
Yes, I'm perfectly ready.
There you are. Off you go then.
Okay. Just before I start, I've kind of taken the decision to explain a few names. It might be incredibly familiar to a lot of us, but I like the idea of a completely level playing field. So do forgive me if I explain one or two things. I'd like to start many years ago, probably in the 1980s, and I interviewed Canon Hall of Leusden on Dartmoor. Dartmoor, of course, big granite moorland in the southwest of England. And Canon Hall was a canon of the cathedral in Exeter, and he was well into his 90s when I interviewed him. And Leusden is it's not even a blink on, it's not even a pinprick on the map. If you say blink, you'd miss it, but actually, if you were driving along a B road on Dartmoor, you'd have to actually deliberately drive off to find this tiny little place. And so Canon Hall lived in the rectory there, was quite big. And I think the reason I was there was that a number of people had said, you really ought to go and see this old man, aged clergyman who has been on Dartmoor, all his life, and is very likely that he would know people and things that you would be interested in, given the sort of research into Dartmoor and folklore and whatever. So that's why I went, and I had a very good, lovely afternoon with a very elegant chap, really loved him. And at some point in our conversation, I mentioned the Reverend Sabine Baring-Gould, one of the folk song collectors of the late 19th century and well known for his work, especially around Dartmoor. And he said, oh, I knew Baring-Gould, very well spoken. I knew Baring-Gould. He said he loved him. He thought he was a great guy. He was, and of course the dates would have been about right, because Baring-Gould died in the mid-1920s. When this nonagenarian would have been probably in his 20s or maybe 30. So that all fit. And the question I asked was a very simple one, and one that we tend to think about sometimes when we think of those Victorian Edwardian collectors. And the question was along the lines of, how did he get these elderly labourers, these Dartmoor, for the most part men, one or two women, how did he get the songs out of them? How did he wheedle the songs out of them? And I kind of have my own theories about that, but I wanted to know what he'd say. And I'll just quote you a transcription from that interview, it's just a sentence or two. And Cannon Hall said, I think he could talk their language. They liked people who could walk the moorland. It's our moor, our kistvaens, our burial grounds. Kistvaens are burial chambers, and Dartmoor is scattered with things like that. And there was this sort of sense that came off him that there was a commonality amongst people who lived in this place, and I think one would have to extend it to any kind of wild and remote place, which in the 1880s certainly would have been very wild and remote. And we discussed things like, after all, you all get snowed in on Dartmoor. When everywhere else in the southwest of England doesn't have snow, Dartmoor always has some. So, you all get snowed in. The bogs, which can be very treacherous. People have been drowned in Dartmoor bogs. You have the same mud, the same floods, and the tors and stones and big piles of rocks. There's a style of dry stone walling. At that time, there were loads of old tracks that people used. These days we just drive across there on roads, but there were loads of old tracks and peat cutting and so on. So the physical environment could bring people together, even when their social class would divide them. And you just think about it, if you were a poor stone cutter in a Dartmoor village, or you were a squire and parson, as Baring-Gould was, living in a big house, the moment you stepped out, there was a kind of a commonality between you. I think if you looked at towns and cities, you'd come to a different conclusion. I'm thinking of, if you think of Henry Mayhew's accounts of London in the mid-19th century, a lot of those people lived in different places, both outdoor and in. So clearly you would go indoors whoever you were, whatever class of society you were, but also in the outdoors and in the working and leisure environments, they could be different. Anyway, I could go on for ages about this interview with Cannon Hall, but he told me one little detail that I thought was very engaging, and I'd never heard it before. And that was that if Baring-Gould came across a singer that he wanted to revisit for any reason, or probably, some of the people had long repertoires, he would leave a little bottle of whiskey in the barn or possibly in the porch with a thank you note on it. Thank you for the songs. And he had obviously told Cannon Hall that this is what he did. And I often wondered if this was really true. And I must say, it is a good ploy if you want to revisit somebody. And again, it sort of it established some kind of commonality between Baring-Gould and his singers. So on to his singers. I'm going to talk about the Westaways family, but the way I got to those is using that old method, tried and tested method, that if people have been doing field research in an area before you have, it's quite a good idea to return to the old families. I tried that with the Hard family of a little village called South Brent. There was a Robert Hard, sang to Baring-Gould. No singers, loads of people by the name of Hard. Absolutely, half the village was called Hard, but no singers. There was the lady Sally Satterley that knew a few songs, and I managed to trace her family to a businessman in Plymouth who would have been even more delighted than I if we could have found anybody who knew the songs. There was an Edmund Fry who sang the Sweet Nightingale, which was sung by his grandfather to Baring-Gould, and he accompanied himself on the piano rather elegantly. This was the first example of folk piano I ever came across. It wasn't the last, but it was really lovely stuff to listen to. There was a Hannaford that I found, Baring-Gould's most prolific informant was James Parsons, and I couldn't find any leads there. Anyway, the Westaway family of the little village of Belstone on the north of the moor, they were actually there. There was a great granddaughter who was the postmistress at the village shop, and somehow or another I got hold of her, and she introduced me to some living survivors of that family. So Henry Westaway was the singer that Baring-Gould wrote down songs from, about 20 songs or more, I'm not quite sure. And then what was interesting was that Peter Kennedy sort of tried the same old ploy and revisited the old families in 1950, and he found Harry and Bill Westaway, who sang some of the family songs. And there I was, and it was in the 1980s, with Ivan Westaway, who was in his 80s, and he referred me also to his sister Lily, who was no longer in the village but wasn't far away. She was in the nearest big city, that was Exeter. So I went to see her. There's a little quote from Baring-Gould, which I've always found interesting, and Martin Grabe drew my attention to this again recently, where he talks about the Westaway sons. And he said, and this is also reading a quote, he says, his sons sang none of their father's songs. Now, wait a minute. Peter Kennedy found Harry and Bill singing their father's songs in 1950, so they learnt them on the way somewhere. They knew and appreciated only Christy minstrels and music hall pieces, void of merit or interest to us. They despised and did not care to learn the old ballads and songs that had come down as an heirloom from their tuneful ancestors. This is typical of his prose, isn't it? And there's some vital information here, though. While he's sort of dismissing an area of repertoire, he kind of lets on a glimpse of the repertoire that was current in that family. And the dates actually are interesting as well, because if he was there with the Westaways in the 1880s, then Harry and Bill, who are the ones I've just referred to, who sang songs to Peter Kennedy in 1950, they would have been in their 20s, maybe 30, teens or 20s, and that would have been an absolutely perfect time for dissemination of songs from probably Plymouth. Plymouth would be the key place because there was a music hall in Plymouth built only a decade or so before. It was a little bit more, 1860s or 70s. There was the first of the music halls they had in Plymouth. And also there was an enormous production of broadside ballads, not enormous by the standards of London printers, but 300 ballads printed by a firm called Keys of Devonport between 1830 and 1870. So that would be a good time. So all this kind of fits. Now, did the young Westaways go down to Plymouth or Exeter to the music halls? They may have. It would have been one hell of a trek. I sort of doubt it. But more importantly, that the songs would have perhaps come to them. And how I don't have any sort of hard proof here, but how I come to that conclusion is that in Totnes, which is the town where I live, at the bottom of the town there is a hotel called the Seven Stars, and outside in the lobby there's a playbill from around about the 1860s, and it advertises things that were on there. And there were indeed Christy minstrels and all sorts of stuff. So this sort of stuff possibly went to Oakhampton, and maybe that would have been where they heard it. I have no idea. Of course, I can't prove all this. But it would be lovely to know how the young Westaways got hold of these songs. Anyway, on to Ivan, Henry's grandson. Now, Ivan knew some of Grandfather's songs. So let's just hear him singing The Fox. He also sang a few other songs to me. I think his favourite one was The Watercress Girl. But this is him singing The Fox. You know, he's a very elderly man, but his pitching is lovely and accurate, and I like his singing. So this is The Fox.
Old fox went out one moonshiny night. He prayed for the moon for to give him good light, for he had a long way for to travel that night before he got home to his day. No, day, no, day, no, for he had a long way for to travel that night before he got home to his day. No. When the old fox came in the farmer's yard, the ducks and the geese they were all along. Be not alarmed, ye ducks and geese, for the best of you all shall grease my beard before I get home to his day. No, day, no, day, no. All the best of you all shall grease my beard before I get home to my day. No.
All right, I probably have to stop there because I'd like to play the whole song, but time is of the essence. What I'll say now is that Ivan referred me to his sister Lily, who I visited, and Lily was the one who gave me some really interesting details and insights about Henry Westaway. Lily knew some songs, but whereas Ivan had stayed in the village all his life, his sister led a rather more cosmopolitan life. For one thing, she went to the Guildhall School of Music in London to study piano and singing. And that sort of would have cost a bit of money in those days. So it's worth asking, okay, how was there money in the family to pay for that? She then moved to Yorkshire, where she was in the West Riding Choral Society, then back to Devon due to marriage. Her name was Lugg. Married name was Lugg, Lillian Lugg. And this is the picture of her grandfather that she gave. And it really isn't anything like the sort of stereotypical idea of who or what is a traditional singer. First of all, Henry played the violin, he read music, he had a sister who played the viola, who also read music, and they read stuff and they also memorized music, which was very useful to him later in life when he went blind. And Lily said he'd sit in the armchair by the fire and he'd say, "Hand me down my fiddle." It was hung in the corner in a beige bag. I love these little details that people remember. And she said he played for hours on end. Hymns, song tunes, classical pieces, dances, anything. And then Lillian really surprised me because we do assume a lot about people who know these songs, but she said, "Grandfather never worked. My grandfather had money. All he thought about was guns and fishing and meeting Baring Gold." That's what she said. Now, where did he have the money from? This is an interesting question. I have heard, and I'm trying to work out where I heard it from, but for many years I've known this, that Henry was a wrestler. So did he earn a lot of money wrestling? Is that where we would look? As a yeoman of Belstone, there was a line that went back to the 15th century at least. Did he inherit money or derive it from his land? Lillian didn't know the answer to any of these questions, just that they led a middle-class existence. They weren't Dartmoor peat diggers or sheep farmers. She remembered a little detail. A group of young doctors wanted to see Dartmoor prison, and Henry's wife, Elizabeth, organised passes for them. They all went. These people obviously had connection with prison governors. They all went, and then afterwards they had lunch at the very posh Duchy Hotel in Princetown. So the Westaways at that time just didn't conform to the stereotype. They had money, connections, they were literate musicians, and obviously there was a broader repertoire in operation than Baring Gould gave them credit for. Berengold went many, many times. I think his first meeting was fixed up for him in Oakhampton, but then after that he actually went to them at Presticott in Belstone. And I'll just finish with a little detail because Lillian casually mentioned something that took me back to that interview with Canon Hall. She said, well, she said, one of the reasons he liked Berengold coming is that when the parson had gone, there would be a bottle of whiskey in the barn. And I thought, well, that's twice I've heard that. So that's a little bit of proof. Let's just hear her sing a little bit of this song, with the one she calls the 14th of December. It has about a dozen different names.
On the 14th of December in Plymouth Sound we lay, waiting for fresh orders, our anchor put away. We're bound for the coast of Africa, our orders they came slow. We're bound to sink and destroy, my lads, wherever we may go. We had not been sailing o'er 20 knots or more before we spied a large ship, and down on us she bore. She hailed us with French colours and asked from whence we came. We just set sail from Plymouth Sound, and Cambridge is our name. Are you a man of war, sir, or pray what may you be? I'm not a man of war, sir, but a pirate as you see. Then pull around your main yards and let your ship come to, with your boots all lord and your ropes all torn, or else I will sink you. With your boots all lord and your ropes all torn, or else I will sink you. Then up.
Okay, very good. I'll finish there. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Sam. Is that the first singing wrestler that we have in our panel? So I think it might be. I think
I don't know. Well, Martin said that one of the other singers that Berengold visited was a wrestler. Isn't that right, Martin?
Yeah, actually, two others. James Olver of Lanson was a wrestler, and Sam Gilbert of Morgan in Pida was also a wrestler, and organised wrestling matches down in that part of Cornwall. So, but there was an awful lot of wrestling going on at the time. So there may be more.
we can have a Penguin book of wrestling songs. Or wrestling.
Yeah. Why not?
I think, Sam, one of the things that surprises me, I thought you were going to say that they all had a copy of Berengold's book. And they had learnt the songs from the book, because I'm sure that happened I know that happened in Somerset. So, was there any evidence of that?
Certainly, when I was doing this interview with Canon Hall that I referred to, he said that had happened to him. He had collected stories, not so much songs, but stories from elderly people, and subsequently found out that they'd got them from Berengold's books. Yeah.
Yes, but not from these songs.
No.
From the Westaways. No. Somebody did have a hand up, but then it went. Who was it? George.
Yes. When one of the Armstrongs first went to see Billy Pig the Piper up in the wilds of Northumberland, and it turned out they had an interest in Cumberland wrestling. So before they actually sat down and had a cuppa, he demonstrated some wrestling holds on him.
Oh, really? Well, it was obviously much more current back then. I mean, all we have now is what is it, the WWE, where they chuck each other out of the ring and jump on each other.
Those were the days. Yeah. They're still wrestling Cumberland in some very strange costumes, but that's another story.
Oh, right.
Dress up in sort of white shorts and a singlet or something.
Sue has the hands don't seem to stay. So Sue.
Was just struggling there. I have put in chat, Cornish wrestling and Cumberland Western wrestling are akin, a Celtic wrestling, where they grab around the back of the other opponent. So they're linked and they wear, they used to wear long johns and embroidered pants, etc. But it's done as a strength thing and it's done as entertainment at country sports, country shows, that sort of thing. In Cumberland anyway, so I'm guessing the same was true of Cornwall.
Yeah, undoubtedly. How dangerous was it? Were you likely to get injured? Does anybody know?
Can I just say we've now got 3 people queuing up with questions, so keep it short. Martin has had his hand up for a while. Martin.
I was just going to ask you, you mentioned one of Edmund Fry's relatives playing a song to a piano. Which one was that, Sam?
Which Fry was it?
Yeah.
I forget his first name now. It's so long ago.
Yeah.
I'll have to look up my list. I've got a big, huge catalogue.
Okay.
I'll look it up.
Because Gerald Tawney did much of what you did, particularly he talked to Bill Fry and got quite a lot of information from him. So
Bill, it wasn't. That doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, because it's so important, this stuff, and thank you for all the things you've added to my knowledge this afternoon.
It was definitely the right one, though, the grandson, because he knew the anecdote about his grandfather falling off a ladder and being killed. It was the same one.
Yeah. Okay.
John Baxter. Hi, John.
It was just a comment on the Westaway boys. You were saying being more interested in the minstrels and the music halls and how would they get hold of the songs. They were published from 1850s, 1860s and available relatively cheap by post. And you can trace their sort of spread through the sort of thing that Steve might talk about later. People sang them in penny readings if it wasn't too early for penny readings, but you can see songs spread relatively quickly compared to the technology of the time. You know, a song could be a hit in London and it would be being sung in America within a few months, and in rural Britain at the same sort of rate. Songs did spread very, very quickly from those sources.
Yes, thank you for that comment. Yeah, I think we don't always give it enough credit for how fast things could spread in the times before mass media.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, John. Katie, last question for Sam. Katie? We can't hear you, Katie.
Can you hear me now?
Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I don't know why that. Don't know what that's about. Anyway.
No, you're very quiet.
I'll come a bit closer to the computer, see if that works. Is that any better?
That's better, yeah.
Don't know what's going on. Sorry. Thank you, Sam. I really enjoyed that. I was interested in your comment about the Christy Minstrel songs. I did some work on King's Lynn where we got singing going back to the 1870s, and then when Vaughan Williams collected, and then the 1950s and 60s, and found that there's very little overlap between them. And in that period you're talking about, a lot of the younger singers certainly seem to pick up on the minstrel repertoire and that kind of thing. And I do think your point about them being young at that point is probably really relevant, isn't it? You know, we all had different tastes. Many of us had different tastes in music when we were sort of in our 20s to what we have in our 60s. So, you know, I find that really interesting. And thank you for picking that up and pointing it out again.
Yes, thank you. I actually have a bit of personal record of that. That my mother knew her grandfather's songs. This is from the industrial north, Preston. But she hated them at the time when she was a little girl. She was in love with Bing Crosby, and her grandfather didn't think he could sing at all. But they are. I mean, the Westaways may have done something like that. You know, they didn't like it on matter of principle because they were young and he was older. But gradually they obviously did absorb his songs.
because collectors have tended to collect from older people?
Yes.
That's why we know why that is, obviously.
Yeah.
That's the point in life where people tend to preserve the songs, I suppose, from previous generations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we better move on because we have another couple of speakers. Thanks again, Sam. That was a good start.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're moving on to Bob. Bob Askew, going to talk about Robin Hood, of course.
Right. So I share screen. Wrong one.
Right, we have that, but not full screen yet. Yeah.
Does that come up okay now?
Yes, we have that.
Right, and you can hear me clearly?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, I'll start. I'm doing Robin Hood and Queen Katherine, also known as Renowned Robin Hood, Child 145, Roud 72. It's a bit of an indulgence for me. I really like Robin Hood, so thank you for letting me do it. The heading is the best of all ballads. I'm afraid that I cheated a bit with the child's quotation to head this presentation, because he actually said the earliest of these Robin Hood ballads are among the best of all ballads. This is not one of the earliest, but I do think the quotation still stands on the quality, because I personally think it's a great ballad. Just as a side, I'm using some illustrations to support the sense of the ballad story. Most are much later than the ballad itself, and you can get by without them if you just listen. I think Robin Hood ballads are very important, but not sung enough. I want to look at one ballad in depth today, and I hope I can convince it's a good one. But first, I have a little time to say why I think these ballads are so important. Robin Hood has been popular in English and British national hero for well over 600 years. About 50 Robin Hood ballads form over 10% of Child's canon, which is a lot. But they're also over 10% of ballad titles collected in this community. That's 1 in 10 of all child ballads titles collected in this country. So they're a hugely important part of English and British ballad tradition. Yet they're rarely sung today in folk clubs and concerts, or even in ballad sessions. I did a TSF presentation a couple of years ago looking at misguided negative criticism of Robin Hood ballads, which I think has been a major factor for us. So I won't go through that again. Many people feel they know all the Robin Hood stories because they've been plundered for novels and film. But as I pointed out before, there are several different Robin Hoods and many interesting details that are airbrushed out when modern writers tried to make a single coherent Robin Hood character. I also went into the range of the stories in the ballads last time. There are lots of fight ballads, but there are many others, lots of variety, which deal with a wide range of issues. No other individual has such a volume and range of ballad stories. There are 50 ballads, Robin Hood ballads in Child. I've just put up on the screen. Do notice 18 have red notes showing 17th century printing. And the first ones are late medieval to early 16th century. So evidence of Robin Hood ballads is earlier than almost all other child ballads. Most child ballads, there's not much evidence, no evidence till the 18th century and often the later 18th century. I think many people are just overwhelmed by the bulk of these ballads if you come see 50 there. If you begin to skim read through them, it tends to blend them together, and I think people often then give up. I must say Child puts the guest of Robin Hood first because it's very old, but I suggest leaving it until later if you're just looking into these ballads, because it is a large literary piece formed out of 8 different ballads. But do look later because the ballads are incorporated with a light touch. I would also suggest putting aside 5, I think, very poor ballads, which I think Child should never have included. Prince of Aragon, The Pedlars, Birth, Breeding, Marriage, Maid Marian, True Tale of Modern Robin Hood, and 2 more as short, rather weak fillers added to another ballad, Robin Hood and the Scotchman and Robin Hood and the Beggar. I haven't really got time to go into why I don't think they're very good, but you can make up your own mind. But I would suggest today I thought I would look at Robin Hood and Queen Katherine, Child 145. I think it's a great ballad, as I said, but interestingly, it's a woman. It has a woman as the second major character. It was very popular in its day, but no versions were noted still sung in the great age of collecting around 1900, and I've never heard anyone sing it today. It's one of the later Robin Hood ballads, probably from the final years of Queen Elizabeth or early 17th century. This copy's circa 23 to 61. We don't actually know how old the original story is, though, the basic narrative. There seems to have been a reciprocal relationship between Robin Hood ballads and medieval plays and medieval shows. Material seemed to come into the ballads. Robin Hood and Queen Katherine could have developed from an earlier ballad or play or story, but it could be totally a new 17th century original piece of writing. Robin Hood stories are set in Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire, but Robin Hood was extremely popular in southern England, and I think that we southerners wanted a piece of the action. I think this led to the creation of the ballad based in London with its archery fields at Finsbury. It had a very plausible plot to bring Robin and his men down to London and out of the usual Greenwood setting. There's some internal indicators. It's a later ballad, apart from the London setting. Will Scathlot is his later name, Will Scarlet, and Friar Tuck and Maid Marian are mentioned for the first and almost only time in a Robin Hood ballad, but they take no part in the actions. It's almost as if well-known Mayday figures casually intrude with a bit part into the story. Now, who's the king if Catherine's a queen? No Robin Hood ballads have nasty Prince John or King John, but they do have a King Edward or a King Richard, and here it's King Henry. He seems very like King Henry VIII, a character, but there's a choice of 8, really. His character is also like Henry II. Robin Hood ballads are set in the past, so any vague memory of a king can fit into the collective memory, and he doesn't need to tie it neatly with any precise history. They were set in the old days of the past. New Robin Hood ballads might be written, but they never come up to date with guns and cannon, although here is a picture of him in 17th century dress, but he still has medieval bow and such. Robin Hood also remains a devout medieval Catholic, despite Britain's very Protestant later history. Henry V married a Catherine, and Henry VIII married 3 Catherines, but Catherine again could be any queen. Although I think Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon fits very well. In this ballad, a woman has a major role. Robin Hood ballads were popular with women singers, and this could be because he's very chivalrous to women in several of them. In Robin Hood and the Potter, he makes chaste courtly love to the sheriff's wife. In Robin Hood and the Widow's 3 Sons, he rescues a lady's condemned sons. And in Robin Hood and Alan a Dale, he stops a young woman having to endure a forced marriage. I'm basing this version on the Percy text, which is Child A, and filling the gaps from the contemporary about. Child B was similar but more confused, and Child C rather simplified. The Forester's manuscript might be nearer the original because it has elements used in all 3 of the ballads, but it's rather long at 66 verses. I prefer the Percy version, and certainly I prefer the Percy ending. It was a very popular ballad in its day, and several other Robin Hood ballads are noted to be sung to its tune. I hope I can render this tune okay. I think it's quite memorable and rather catchy. I also think the narrative is rather well made. There may be a few redundant lines like the Queen gan to say to fill out a rhyme, but I could find no verses in the general plot to cut without taking away from the story. I felt I needed to shorten it to sing it out because 40 verses is enough for me. So I reluctantly cut out some verses about the Bishop of Hereford. He has his own ballad, and this is largely a bit of colour to show that betting was going on, with the bishop's eventual realisation he's made a bet with his old adversary Robin Hood. But I don't think there's a really big loss to the main line without it. Just talking of my delivery, as far as I can make out, ballads were sung in different styles according to the taste of the performer and the situation with the audience. William Muir, in her book Living with Ballads, said some singers sang them more purely to the tune, while others dramatised them. And Reg Hall stated similarly that some sang them straight and some used a declamatory style. So I might use a bit of drama in my singing today, especially as I'm going to emphasize the good points about the ballad. I apologize to people with sensitive ears if I should falter in the tune. I'm not a professional singer, and I don't find it easy to combine singing and talking. I almost never take a text with me when I sing out, but I'm going to use one today so I don't lose any verses when I'm speaking. I'll be making some comments as I go along, and some might be personal, conjectural, but ultimately I hold that we all act subjectively to ballad stories that we hear. I think I got ahead of myself. It starts with a come all ye to call attention and to quiet the audience. It says what the ballad is about, how Queen Katherine got a pardon for Robin Hood through a subterfuge. Oh, list, you gentlemen, a while, a little space. I'll tell you how Queen Katherine got Robin Hood his grace. Gold from the king's harbingers was taken and never seen, and carried by bold Robin Hood a present to the Queen. In medieval times, loyalty and honour was regarded higher than overt rule of law. A lowly man gives a gift to a higher, and the higher man gives back a favour. Robin Hood gives the Queen a present of gold. It's incidentally stolen from the king, so it's no wonder that King holds him an outlaw. The Queen plans to repay Robin Hood. But several Robin Hood ballads deal with his honourable, chivalrous relations with women. So I think chivalry comes into it as well as their usefulness to each other. We go back to the Queen in this picture here. If I live to this year's end, the Queen she 'gan to say, I'll be her friend to bold Robin Hood and all his yeomen gay. The king and queen in the garden went to pass some time away. What game, my queen, he said, for honour awful glee. The Queen grabs her chance to create a situation where Robin Hood can be pardoned. Make a little wager, sir, she said, and holding you shall be. Have a shooting for my sake, the best in Christianity. The king's competitive instinct is roused, and he makes the wager very big. 200 tons of Rhenish wine, 200 tons of beer, 200 of the finest hearts that run in Dyronlee. The Queen is ready to make a move. She knows the king is very competitive. He relishes the skills of his archers, but he wants to make sure he wins. So he's not very likely to lend her some to make it a fairer competition. But where are my archers, sir, she said. Of them you have the flower. Choose where thou wilt, dame, he said, out of all England, or from North Wales to Westchester, and also Coventry. And when you've chosen the best of them, the wager must go to me. The Queen then goes to her palace. The Queen is to her palace gone. To a page she 'gan to say, come hither, Dick Patrickton, trusty and true to this day. I must say he's trusty and true, unlike the page in the contemporary Little Muscrew who betrays his lady. She goes on, she says to him, commend of me to Robin Hood, and also Little John, specially Will Scarlet, for our Tucker may marry him. She tells him to go to Robin Hood. Robin is to call him to London. It's not clear what status Locksley has, but he must be high to be able to later converse directly with the Queen. She says, good we must call Lock. The men must change their names, be strangers everyone. The page goes off, he took his horse betimes in the morn, and soon as he could see, and he is hied to Robin Hood, and fell down on his knee. Queen Katherine commends you well, and sends a ring away. In London you must be with her upon St. George's Day. She has taken a shooting for thy sake, the best in Christianity, and her part you need must take against our King Henry. She sends you here this gay gold ring, a true token for to be, and since you are a banished man, she trusts to set you free. Robin replies magnanimously, and if I lose, said Robin Hood, I'll bring money to pay for me, but whether I win or whether I lose, on her part I will be. He and his men make a magnificent spectacle. I'm sorry, he's probably halfway between these two pictures. I couldn't get a good one. He dressed himself in scarlet red, and his men in Lincoln green, hats of black and feathers white, and bows and arrows keen. And when they got to London town, they fell down on their knees. God save you, Queen Katherine, and all thy dignity. Thou'rt welcome, Locksley, said the Queen, and all thy archers good. I trust before this day's end to call thee Robin Hood. The Queen rushes to King Henry and complains there's no archer in her court who will compete with his men. The Queen, she is fast away to the King's chamber gone. There's not a man in all my court will stand against thy men. King happily gloats, his archers are so good. That I know well, said the King. My archers are so good. There's not a man will stand with them unless he be Robin Hood. Then she makes her move. Double the wager, sir, she said. Brave Holden, thou shalt be. The King's taken aback. By my troth, dame, he said, woman's subtlety. Very like Henry VIII. But he goes on, leading the magnificent procession in Spree. The King is to Finsbury gone, with all his best array. The Queen, she followed after him, with all her archers gay. It would have been a magnificent sight like the Jubilee celebrations, but there's also a strong air of competition, like a big football match. This is where I've cut out the 7 verses dealing with the Bishop of Hereford betting, but many bets are going on. The Queen's ladies are betting strongly for her. There's a boisterous bravado among the competitors. The King asks his champion archer, Tempest, to measure the targets. Come hither, Tempest, said the King, the best in Christianity, and measure out here with thy line how far the mark shall be. Then up he spoke old Locksley then, so quickly and so soon. Don't measure for us, my liege, we'll shoot at sun and moon. Now, this is some boast. I don't think even Putin can shoot the moon or the sun out. The King has to take Robin's boast as part of the boisterous spirit of the event. He angrily says, for 15 score the march shall be, for 15 score shall stand. And when he knows the length, Robin's confident and mutters to the Queen that he'll win. I lay my bow, said Robin Hood, I'll split the willow one. The King's archers start the main part of the competition. The archers of the King led off till the score was 3-0. Then the ladies began to pout, Madam, the game is gone. But Robin's men make the score level. Then shot the archers for the Queen till the score was 3-3. Then the ladies merrily shout, Woodcock, watch thy eye. The ladies are really getting into the spirit of the competition. Jeering at the opponents is a far cry from the usual demure historical picture we have of medieval ladies. The image they use is not very nice to modern ears, but as woodcocks are about the size of a pigeon, it is some boast to say the Queen's men can hit one in the eye at 300 yards. I'm going to sing the next verses through. There are some nice details about the accuracy of the shooting. The competition is reaching its crisis. The King is not winning as easily as he had thought, but he still relishes the tight competition. Well game, said the King. The third 3 pays for all. Robin rounded on the Queen. The King's part shall be small. Then shot Tempest for the King, and he shot gallantly. Then shot Locksley for the Queen, and clove his arrow in 3. Then shot Midge the miller's son, and his was not for the worse. Within an inch of the peg, the King's wagers near lost. Then shot the yeoman of the crown, but he shot underhand. Little John with a bearded arrow, he clove the willow one, so the next shot can win the match. The upshot now, said Will Scarlet, for the honour of Queen and sea. He took the prick at arrow point, the King and all did see. Will Scarlet has a winning shot. Tempest is suspicious, but he doesn't want to accuse Robin Hood to his face. Then said Tempest to the King, these archers are so good, I'm afraid, and it please your grace, they learned of Robin Hood. The Queen jumped quickly in before the King's anger can rise to arrest Robin. A boon, said the Queen. I ask it on my knees, that thou wilt angry be with none that are in my company. It's supposed to be a joyous occasion, so the King has to respond positively to this very public request. He cannot let his short temper get the upper hand, and he can't show bad sportsmanship at losing. So he says, 40 days they shall have to come, and 40 days to go, and twice 40 days to sport and play. Welcome, friend or foe. The Queen grabs her chance to introduce Robin and his men to make sure he's in on the pardoning. Then welcome Robin Hood, said the Queen, and so is little John, and so is Much the miller's son, will Scarlet and every one. The King tries to recruit Robin Hood to join his renowned archers. Wilt thou leave your outlaw band and come and live with me? Then I would say, welcome Robin Hood, the flower of archery. No, I'll not leave my outlaw gang for all the gold in Christianity. I'll end my days in merry greenwood under my trysting tree. Robin's loyalty is first to the Queen. She is his protector, so unlike almost anyone else in the country, he is able to refuse the King's request. So find your archers where you will. My liege, you'll have none of me. But if the Queen lifts her finger, at her side I will be. Now, this is more or less the end, but I must just add something. Robin Hood and Queen Katherine, this ballad stands well alone, but there was a sequel written about the same time, Robin Hood's Chase. This is interestingly to a different tune known as Arthur a Bland, used for quite a lot of Robin Hood songs. The King has only pardoned Robin Hood for a short period, and he chases him all over the country in a furious, angry mood. Misses him every time. Robin's eventually pardoned for life at the end, but in a reference to the shooting match in this ballad we just heard, he says that if he had missed the mark, then hanged he would have been. It's not quite such a jolly event as it appeared on the surface. Robin is really taking quite a risk. Robin Hood and Queen Katherine stands well alone as a ballad, and you can make up your mind whether you want the sequel with it or not. I hope you've enjoyed it. I emphasize the subtleties of the story because I think some might be missed if it's a first hearing. I hope you'll agree that it's a worthy ballad and possibly agree with me that it's among the best of all ballads. So you have listed, gentlemen, this wildest little space. That is how Queen Katherine got Robin Hood his grace. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. You need to unshare.
Oh, how do I unshare? I haven't got that.
A bit at the top there. That's it. Well done. That was quite
Thank
exciting.
you very
wasn't
much.
it?
Much appreciated.
That's the way to hear a ballad. With great pictures. Bob mentioned his previous Robin Hood presentation, which is available on YouTube, as are a lot of our presentations. So between now and the autumn, if you really miss us, you can review all the highlights on YouTube. Do we have any Robin Hood fans who want to chip in here? Anybody want to say anything? Don't have any hands up as yet. No. Well, thank you, Bob. That was,
Right, okay. I had loads of questions last time. One out.
You've stunned them all. But anyway, thank you. Right. Okay. So we move on to the third person of the day, which is me. As I said at the beginning, for those who were here, this is really just to fill in a blank spot that we had. And it's very much a work in progress. And some of you will have heard some of this before. In fact, some of you may have heard all of it before. I can't remember whether I've said it or not. But never mind, it'll finish off the season. So we need, have I got a title page, Martin? Martin's going to press the buttons for me. So as you know, much of my time these days is spent trying to find evidence of vernacular singing practice in the past. The Victorian and Edwardian collectors and their successors have given us a wealth of material and information, but their evidence is patchy and limited, and it sometimes feels like they're getting in the way of our view. So I'm always looking for sources to complement what they tell us and to find out what they weren't collecting, and what was happening before their time. I call this getting behind the collectors. But I also have another mantra. I'm not looking for folk songs, I'm looking for what the folk sang. And we can argue about who the folk were on another occasion. As a local history librarian, I've always been aware of the value of newspapers as a primary resource. I once found, quite by chance, a report of my grandmother being arrested for singing in the street in 1928. But the availability of online full text searching has brought the importance of newspapers to a much higher level. Two of our regular contributors, Colin Bargery and John Baxter, have already given us presentations using extensive newspaper evidence. And Bob Strom has compiled a whole book. We can have a new slide, Martin, please. The Unique Book of Songs of the Sea is based entirely on newspaper reports. Although at present it's unpublished, but anybody who knows Bob Strom should email him and tell him he's got to publish it. It will be very interesting. The two main sites that I use for this kind of research are the British Newspaper Archive and the American Newspapers.com. And I've put those links in the chat already. Newspapers.com has a tie-up with the family history site Ancestry. And although it's American-based, it has many, many British titles. And these are, the first two of these are subscription sites, but they usually have free trial periods, and you can get access through many major libraries and other institutions if you shop around. And there is also the free site, the third one there, Trove, for Australian papers, which are absolutely fascinating. And there are also other local and regional sites. In all cases, the search engines are quirky and not well designed, and from an indexing point of view, not good at all, but they're better than nothing. You have to be methodical, patient, and inventive in your searching. But there are already tens of millions of pages available, and I'm not exaggerating, and more appearing all the time. And they are a real window into the everyday past. Song information appears in a huge variety of contexts, but the main ones that I have discovered to be useful are the following. Each category is rewarding in a different way, and each needs different handling as a historical source, which we won't be able to cover in detail today. Next image, please, Martin. The images I'm showing are a bit dull after Bob's colourful ones, but they're the best I can do. Newspaper articles are not particularly photogenic, nor are lists of them. But these are the categories, or some of them, that I find songs in the newspapers. So number one, newspapers as a vehicle for publishing original work, particularly poetry. Certainly in the earlier 19th century and all through the 19th century, really, people who wrote poetry often sent them to their local paper for publication, and these got syndicated across the nation, basically. So poems often entered the public consciousness through people sending them into the local paper. Category two, old songs columns, where readers send in their favourites, or more interestingly, ask for people to supply words for songs that they have forgotten or have heard about. Some of these columns ran for decades, especially in America, and we know that people cut out the song text and stuck them in scrapbooks, so they functioned like broadsides. Number three, notes and queries and antiquarian sections, people writing in about quaint old songs and local customs. Number four, and this I'm going to come back to in detail in a minute, John Baxter's already mentioned it today, reports of events which include singing, such as annual dinners, harvest homes, and so on. Category 5 reports of other events which refer to songs or singing in passing. For example, court cases, which is a surprisingly fruitful category. We have an example in a minute. Number 6, adverts becoming entertainment, plays, concerts, and so on, or new publications. And that's particularly important for the Christy Minstrel type songs that we've already had mentioned. The pop songs of the day, basically. And that's one of the ways of nailing when they first came out, who were singing them, how they were being spread around. Number 7, general reporting, which gives evidence for language usage, phrases, etc. Again, this is a sort of byproduct of the song stuff and very useful. We'll have an example in a minute. Number 8, regular columns and articles compiled by or about the folk song collectors. And these often give us different slants to that given in the collectors' books themselves. And then number 9, which I hadn't really thought about until after I'd done this slide. John Baxter, literally in the last couple of days, has sent me a spreadsheet, 670 music hall songs, which were published in the Weekly Dispatch, one a week, as far as I know, the words and the music, from 1903 all the way through to 1927. And the other newspapers like The People, Reynolds News, the News of the World did the same. They published music hall and other popular songs week by week, often with the music. So again, this comes back to what was said earlier on today with Sam's talk about how songs spread around, how new popular songs were spread around the country, not exactly instantly, but very quickly, because if the papers picked up on it, thousands of people could read the song. And again, we know that people stuck these in scrapbooks. I've got a scrapbook I found in a junk shop, which is literally bits out of the News of the World, the songs that they published around 1911. So we know that people use these as ways of learning their repertoire. So as an example of category 7, which was the language use, I used the Bonnie Bunch of Roses. I should have had a picture of some roses there, but you haven't got them. Commentators often state that the phrase Bonnie Bunch of Roses was a common term for the British Army, what we called our soldiers, that predates the song. But a search of the newspapers for that phrase brings up nothing at all before the song's publication in 1832. And it seems to be, and also there's other evidence, that that phrase, Bonnie Bunch of Roses, is an invention of the person who wrote that song. He used it in another song as well later on. But after that date, not only is the song widely mentioned, but the phrase is used for racehorse names and ship names and so on. So the phrase comes from the song and it enters general parlance from the song. It's not the other way around, that the songwriter used a phrase that's already there. So we've got a new image as an example of category 5, which is other events. This is a court case, one of my favorites. You may have heard this one before because I like it. You won't have to read the whole thing because I'm going to summarize it for you. The Chudley Knighton domestic and the sing-song, reported in the Western Times, 13th of February, 1903. At the Newton County Court, Alice Maud Soper, a labourer's daughter from Chudley Knighton in Devon, was suing Mrs. H. Limpus for £1, 1 shilling and 8 pence, or a month's wages. Mrs. Limpus had engaged Alice as a servant, but had then broken off the agreement on the grounds that Alice had been singing and dancing in 2 public houses. Alice admitted singing at the Clay Cutters Arms, but said she was in a private bar and sat between her father and mother. She had nothing to drink, but had sung The Miner's Dream, presumably the miner's dream of home, and the young sailor cut down in his prime, which I would have thought was a risque song for a young girl to sing, because it's about, as we know, about a soldier dying of venereal disease. And on another occasion, she had sung The Widow. She denied dancing and stated she had made up her mind not to sing in a public house again. Her mother was called as a witness and declared, "I shan't tell no lies, sir," as she was being sworn in. Her daughter had been asked by her father to sing, and she done it like any other girl would. She saw no harm in her daughter being at the Clay Cutter's Arms. If she had been there with a parcel of young fellas, it would have been a different thing. Alice had not danced. Counsel for Mrs. Limpus said that she thought that girls singing in pubs was gross moral misconduct. But she admitted sending her young nurse girl to the Clay Cutters for cider, but only to stew some pears in. Another witness claimed that Alice had been seen dancing in the tap room, i.e. not a private room at all, on Boxing Day, a sort of swinging around dance with her sister. The magistrate declared that Alice's parents were unwise to take their girl into a pub, but found in her favour and ordered Mrs. Limpus to pay up. Okay, next image. Category 2, Old Songs section. You can probably read much of this. The fact that someone is asking for a song is evidence of some sort of popularity. And when someone replies with a text, they sometimes say it is from memory or where they got it from, with comments like, "We all sang this in the 1870s," or "This was my mother's favourite song." In a few cases, quite specific information is provided. For example, this one is from the Inter-Ocean, a Chicago newspaper, 3rd of April 1910. The song is requested by Mrs. G.F. Kimbrell of Chicago. It's sent in by Henry Willis of Leesburg, Indiana, who says, "I learned this in England when 7 or 8 years old. Now I am past 76. I send you all I remember." It's not much. It's just one little couple of sentences there and an incomplete text. But the point is that this is way before the collectors were out in the field. Certainly in America, we're talking about evidence here of it being sung in the 1840s in England and then going to America. So that's why I like this kind of stuff. It's that little detail. And another image, please, on the same page, requested by the same Mrs. Kimbrell, who obviously liked her folk songs, the British Revelry, which we will know as the Golden Vanity, or in this case, it's the Green Willow Tree and the British Revelry, sent in by G.C. Hampton of Iowa, who says, 55 years ago, when I was a youth for 10 years, an old whaler used to come to father's home and tell stories and sing songs to us kids until we were obliged to wash our faces in cold water to keep awake. This is all I remember. Again, a small detail, but useful as evidence. And the next picture, please. No. Oh, we'll come on to that in a minute. They can stay there, that's fine. There are several well-known examples of category 8 of folk song collectors reporting their findings. Alfred Williams in the Wiltshire and Gloucester Standard, which Martin used as his book, Scotland Songs of the Upper Thames. Should have had a picture of that. Frank Kidson in the Leeds Mercury, Sam Henry in the Northern Constitution, Gavin Gregg in the Buchan Observer, and there are many equivalents in the US, such as a series called the New England Folk Song by Helen Harkness, Flanders, and Fanny Extorm in the Bangor Daily News in 1934. That's Bangor in Maine as opposed to Bangor in Wales, by the way. But again, there's meant to be a picture there. These, as I say, give a different slant on what the collectors actually put into their books and often have more detail about the singers. But I want to concentrate now on category 4 in my list, which was the singing of songs at meetings and dinners of local clubs and societies, which was astonishingly common up to the turn of the 20th century, at least. Regional newspapers relied on local correspondents sending in regular reports from their own communities, and there are often pages of news from specific villages or suburbs written by people with local knowledge. Meetings were often reported in detail. Often sing-songs were so, although sing-songs were so commonplace that the piece often simply says, many songs were sung after the dinner was over. But sometimes we have much more. For example, the catchily titled Hyde and Glossop Weekly News and North Cheshire Herald, or North Cheshire Herald for short, in the 1870s and 1880s. It just so happens that the correspondent from Hazel Grove, which was then 3 miles south of Stockport, made a habit of printing the titles of all the songs sung at each event and who sang them. Amongst others, he or she reported the meetings of a wide range of bodies, including, well, this list has now been on the screen for a few minutes, so you'll have all read it. All of these, the Hazel Grove Botanical Society, fourth one down, the Loyal Order of Druids and the Loyal Order of Ancient Shepherds. They weren't real Druids or Ancient Shepherds, they were benefit clubs with fancy names. All sorts of clubs, the whist match between the Imperial Working Men's Club and the Kingston Working Men's Club, right down to the annual treat for the old people. All of these, they got together, they had their business meeting, they had a dinner, they drank a load of toasts, and then they sang songs. So we get a list. Here's a list of the songs sung at these events. It's only a partial list. I haven't finished. That's why there's no Roud numbers. I haven't finished indexing these yet. I've highlighted some of the titles you might recognize, but look at the ones that aren't highlighted, because there's a lot there you won't recognize, i.e. popular songs of the day. There's a lot of stuff here that we would call national songs, like Hearts of Oak and the British Lion, Larboard Watch. That on page 2, there's lots of them. And there's things like Pulling Hard Against the Stream, the kind of aphorism, is that the word? Kind of song. Anyway, go on to the 3rd page, the songs. I'm not reading them all out. As you see, Spencer the Rover turns up 4 times. It's the only song so far that's come up 4 times. There are others that come up twice. That's partly because that's what I searched for. One of the ways to search for relevant material is to pick on a song title, Spencer the Rover, for example, which I did, and that brings up hundreds of hits. All across the north of England, people were singing Spencer the Rover. And it appears 4 times, as I've said here. But you have to be careful here. Search engines often have stop words. They're the common words that they strip out of the search. So if you put in Spencer the Rover, it will actually be looking for Spencer Rover, or Spencer and Rover. You'll be surprised how many footballers called Spencer have played for Blackburn or Tranmere Rovers over the years. And of course, you're going to get them as well as Spencer the Rover song. So that's what I mentioned at the beginning. You have to be inventive with your searching strategies. These reports provide a wealth of information about vernacular singing practice. Previously, unaccessible to us. But a few comments about this as evidence. The reports give the names of the singers, so an intensive genealogical study would be possible to put further flesh on the bones. The events I've listed appear to be mostly tradespeople, artisans, and respectable working class. The ordinary pub sing song on a Saturday night won't be included. It was apparently de rigueur to appoint a chairman and a vice chairman for every event, and the programme was usually worked out in advance, which is how the correspondent could have all the titles and the names because it was written down. Instruments and dancing are only occasionally mentioned. Toasts were always drunk, and usually a recitation or two was included. There were many other types of event which I have not factored in, religious meetings, and children's parties, for example. And there were also regular village concerts, which appear to have been more respectable and a little higher up the social scale, usually organised by the vicar or the school teacher or their wives. The programmes of these is noticeably more refined, and they are much more likely to include piano or violin accompaniment, and they often have the air of people being sung to rather than singing themselves, hence the name they usually called concert. The most important thing to remember is that the club meetings, dinners, and so on were almost entirely men. Women do appear more often in the concert style of events, but again, that's drawn mostly from the middle classes. But at your average club dinner, it was men only. Now, just to finish off, one more example, hard evidence from definite working people is less easy to come by. But here's one example. The Plankers Party, North Cheshire Herald, 1st of February 1879. On Monday evening, a party of some 12 or 13 plankers employed at Messrs. Axon, Grundy and Rowbottom's hat manufacturers met at the Bird in Hand to hold their annual party. On the proposition of Mr. James Shaw, it was decided that all present should contribute to the evening's entertainment by song or recitation. We've heard that many times before. Or in default, a quart of nut brown. William Hopwood knowed naught else, so he recited the pace egg play. The evening was further diversified by the appearance of a black-faced minstrel from Manchester, who demonstrated fire eating, swallowing lighted fuses, and putting a red-hot poker in his mouth. They knew how to have fun in 1879. Unfortunately, the songs sung on this occasion are not named. So there you have it, a little scamper through newspaper reports. You're going to be hearing a lot more of those whenever I mention anything, because that's where most of my evidence comes from these days. So thank you very much. Need to find my glasses. And thank you to me for being the third one and the last one of this season. And already we have two hands up. Conrad first. Oh, three hands up. Conrad, you're first.
This is really a wonderful presentation. It summed up exactly what I would want to say someday. Now you've done it. Those little advertisements are just like fireworks, shooting out sparks of information in 5 different dimensions all the time. The song, the person who that song is their primary stage presence. You can follow them with the song throughout their career. Then you've got the people who are able to provide the paper copy. Then you've got all of these other different things. That's how I got to run into Albert Smith. Albert Smith turns up in the ads, and he's playing it again and again and again when he's not showing his slides of Himalayas, but he's always there. Then he leads you to Dickens and to other associates, and it's just on and on. And the article is only the size of an inch. No, you can't let them just go by. And it's not always something you know. It's not going to come up in your keywords. These are maybe one of those words as a keyword. The rest of them are new. They're also new stuff. So it's fascinating. You got to follow each one of those up. When you look at businesses and their seasonal rounds, they always, the ones downtown London, the guilds, always have a wassail bowl, almost always. There's always a wassail bowl somewhere, and they have a wassail attached to their annual meeting. And they have to go sing around the wassail course, various versions of wassail. Verses come out, then you take the verses and go to the full song found somewhere else. But the wassail, put that one in, and you'll see quite a few different corporate events. The corporate wassail is a whole category of its own that people don't really talk about much. But that's how the holiday, the practice was preserved by the wealthy people, with a lot of good money behind it, and money for products. And it also trickled down because employees were invited to partake as well. So that's it's quite a good thing you've done here. Put all this together.
Thank you, Conrad. We must move on. We've got 7 hands up already, but I'll say something about what Conrad mentioned, keywords. Remember, when you're searching for keywords, you're searching for something you know. Always keep an eye out for what you don't know, because you search for Spencer the Rover because you know it's a part of the song, but it'll bring up all sorts of other things, and they're what we're really after. Anyway, Irene's next. Keep it short, everybody. We've got lots of people.
Can you actually hear me, because I've had problems with my headphone in?
Just about, yes. Speak up.
I'll take the earphone out. Hold on.
Is that better?
Yes.
I was interested in that, Steve, because when I was doing my research on Henry Garman, I was searching through the newspapers for him to find out what he'd been doing. And I found, I got quite excited because I found references to Henry Garman appearing at a concert in terms of funds for the Capel Working Men's Institute, and found 3 songs down there which he'd sung, apparently. One of which was When the Boys Come Marching Home. Thought that was fairly bog standard. Another one was the Gleaner's Slumber Song, which is a fairly schmaltzy little sort of ditty about pastoral life. And the other one was something called Pattern to the World, which was written by Henry Dacre, who was the one that wrote Daisy Bell, A Bicycle Built for Two, which was pretty gung-ho, and it was a Boer War song, basically, written in 1901. I was pretty excited by that. It goes with what you were saying, that they said of the actual concert, the organisers of the concert have been fortunate in obtaining the greatest local talent. The artists acquitted themselves and were heartily applauded. The majority of the items were accompanied by Miss Hilda Palmer. What I discovered was it wasn't my Henry Garman. It was actually his nephew. His nephew by his sort of one of his brother's children. So there's a second Henry Garman who is a singer in the family. Further newspaper research showed that there was a Jessie Garman who sang for the local firemen's smoking club here in Guildford and was given a hearty round of applause. It didn't say what he sang. So I got 3 members of the family who were all singers. Apart from the songs, I also managed to establish that George Grantham, who'd sung to Lucy Broadwood, had died at the age of 81 locally while working out in the fields in a heat wave. The temperature was 103 in the shade, and he collapsed and was taken to the local nursing home. So I'd got some more information about a singer from the newspapers. So yeah, what you were saying just chimed with everything that I've come up against so far, and I can see that there's more research to do on the singing family of the Garmans. But that's
Thank you, Irene. We must move on. John Baxter next.
Yeah, I'll try and be really brief because this is really right up my street. I wanted to say two things. One is to agree that the different databases have their own peculiarities, and you have to get used to using them and how the and be aware of the limitations of OCR that Vic has been mentioning in the chat. You've always got a compromise between a long search string that would find you exactly what you want, and the fact that the longer the search string you put in, the more likely the OCR, the less likely it is for the OCR to recognize it. I wanted to also say I think that archive.com is a very useful website to find things that aren't necessarily newspapers, that are periodicals. Things like Variety are all within archive.com, but also things like the Blackwoods magazine, where you can find, I found some quite interesting stuff about the songs that Scottish miners were singing at the turn of the century. So I'll just say that that's also a very useful database.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yes, I didn't touch on magazines, but they too had a huge amount of material. One thing about the OCRing, optical character recognition, remember that these images have not been taken from the originals in most cases. They've been taken from microfilm copies of the originals. And those microfilms were often made in the 1960s and 70s. So the quality of the images is very poor, and therefore the quality of the searching, the text searching, is poor, because the poor computer can't read the words because they're too faint and stuff. So you really do have to work quite hard at, as John says, working out how to do your searching. And we should have a session on that, shouldn't we? Of course we should. Dick, you're next.
Yes, well, I'm very impressed that you did quote about Sam Henry and the music from up there. When I heard you were talking about this, I was hoping you had mentioned the wonderful book that Lonnie Herman, who was the editor really of the whole thing, died just last year in Hawaii. I'm sure many of you know who she is. And but I haven't heard any discussion at all before on TSF about that book, so I'm interested to know if
we did.
It will be a useful resource.
Yeah, we did have a presentation from the Coleraine Museum about the St. Henry collection.
Oh, great!
A few months ago, so that'll be up on YouTube.
Well, that's right. I remember now, right?
Yeah, because a lot of the newspaper articles are up online on the Coleraine Museum site, because they are the ones that St. Henry cut out himself from the newspaper. So it's, as we know, everybody cut things out the newspaper. They really did. Steve Garden.
Hi, Steve. Yes, 3 great talks. This links up what Sam was saying, or might help Sam's studies and what you're saying as well. I've been using local newspapers quite a lot lately, a couple of hours a week, looking for something entirely different. The ship's called Billy Boys, and looking up their history, putting together stuff for a book. But at the same time, I'm coming across adverts for well-known singers like Harry Lynn and Harry Clifton, who were constantly touring around the country, not just the big cities, but smaller towns as well. And that's another source for the people that Sam was talking about, learning their songs. They literally went to the small towns as well as the great big cities. The newspaper I'm looking at is a Ghoul one, which was at that time in the 1870s, 60s, was quite a small town. And these big names like Harry Clifton and Harry Lynn are constantly turning up as appearing in concerts there, very popular concerts.
Very good, yeah.
Yeah, we tend to think about, we have this stereotype of, villages that are cut off from the world kind of thing, and nobody went past the parish boundary. And of course, it's certainly for the 19th century. That was all nonsense, because lots of people were traveling around, and as you say, music was coming in and out, all the time. And why wouldn't it? You got no more questions? Everybody happy? Like we are. Yes. Thank you very much to our 3 speakers. Thank you to all our speakers that we've had at our 60 events. Don't forget, we're not meeting again until whenever it was, September the 11th. Have a good summer, everybody. Nice to see you all. Look after yourselves. Bye-bye.